everyone, Tess Thomas here from Clay County Historical and Arts Council. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Go to Jail. Today we're in the Old Jail Museum just off the square of Hayesville, North Carolina, and we're in our front room with Dr. Terry Penland. Terry, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about your family. And you'll notice behind us is this very first telephone that was in Clay County, and Terry's going to tell us all about that. So if you want to just start off with how your family came to the area, Terry, so that we can, kind of know where you guys all came from, that would be great.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me here.
Oh,
and it's just such an honor. My grandfather was such an inspiration in my life, and I'm so proud of him.
Absolutely.
My family came to this area around 1857. The Penlands had been in the eastern part of the country before then, but in 1857, my great-grandfather, Henry Monroe Penland, got a land grant in where the Elf area is in Hayesville.
Where Elf School?
Okay. Elf School, yes,
Elf
very
Church.
close to there.
Close to that.
And he and his wife, Patience Moore Penland, moved their family into this area where they built a house in 1860.
Wow.
It is still standing. I think people are still living there. I haven't checked that out.
That's amazing.
Anyway, have to say I'm well aware of the fact that my family, part of their legacy is that my ancestors ended up on land that was Cherokee land, and Henry Monroe and his wife Patience owned 8 slaves.
Oh.
So we also have that legacy, and I wanted to mention that. Well, they moved to this area and they had 13 children.
Woo! Wow, I can't even imagine.
They had 13 children. The 4th child was Charles Newton Penland, and that's my great-grandfather.
Okay. He
was married to Margaret Jane McClure. And if anyone out there knows anything about Margaret Jane McClure, I would love to have more information, because as I tell my story, I think you'll see that she was a pretty remarkable woman.
Amazing.
And it's hard to track down through the genealogy. It's hard to track down women's stories. So
Sure.
I would love to hear if anyone has anything.
Do you want to add your email address in here at this point?
Sure.
So that people, if they do have information, you can email her directly, Dr. Terry Penland. And what's your email?
It's terry.penland23@gmail.com. So if you have any information. So now we're at Charles and Margaret Jane. Over a 28-year period, Margaret Jane gave birth to 13 children, giving birth to her last child when she was 47.
Oh my gosh.
I know. It's remarkable to me.
Right.
So, they had some challenges at this point. They had bought a house from the Moore family out in Shooting Creek, in the north section of Shooting Creek. They bought a house there. They were farmers. They did all the animals, livestock, all of that. 2 of the children died in childbirth. They were twins. And then another died when he was 1 year old. My grandfather used to say, I would have been an only child if not for 12 others. So
If not for 12 others. That's hilarious.
Things started going a little more challenging for them. In 1896, at the age of 11, one of their children, Joe, was now the family I get mixed messages.
Sure.
But the family would say that he was either kicked in the head by a mule or he fell off a horse and hit a stone. But anyway, in 1896, Joe died at the age of 11. I think I said that.
Oh, wow.
In 1898, their last child was born. This is my Uncle Sylvie. And the same year, the father, Charles Newton, died from typhoid.
Oh,
so if you can imagine,
here's
Margaret Jane in Shooting Creek, out in the rural area. She's a widow. She has in home a 9-month-old, a 4-year-old, a 10-year-old, which is my grandfather, a 16-year-old, and an 18-year-old.
Bless her heart.
So this is in 1898.
Wow, yeah, before the turn of the century. Unbelievable.
Well, it would just seem natural then at that point that all the kids were expected to help with
Absolutely.
the chores. So they were plowing and harrowing fields. They were cutting, chopping wood. They were, hauling produce like corn and hay in wagons. They were mending fences. They were doing carpentry work. So they all learned those skills
At a very young age.
at a very young age.
Wow,
I'm
yeah.
sure my grandfather. So then, one of the funny stories during this time was that their father had this old mule named Old Maud, and he only rode this mule to church. So after he died, well, they needed to use Old Maud for chores around the house, but they couldn't, or to go somewhere. They couldn't go anywhere unless they took Old Maud to the church first, and then Old Maud would go wherever they wanted.
But immediately she left the home and went to the church.
She went to the church. She wasn't going to, because that's where
wow.
their father would take her every Sunday. That's the only thing he did was take her to church. And so
that's amazing.
that's funny.
Yeah, I like it. Can you imagine them trying to tug on her and come on, Mom, we want to go this way? No,
we have to go to church first, and then you go wherever
That's a great story.
In 1890, my grandfather was at that point 11 years old, and he was sneaking out of the house. It was night. He was sneaking out with probably his older brothers, and they were going to go out and go hunting. And they found a stump in the fields where they thought there was a possum in the stump. So my grandfather was holding the lantern, and the older boys were chopping. It ended up being a rabbit, by the way. Anyway, they were chopping, and a piece of bark fell into my grandfather's eye.
Oh, no.
But he didn't tell his mom because he had not been doing
He would have been in trouble.
He would have been in trouble.
Oh.
So this eye became terribly inflamed and infected.
Oh.
And the local doctor, there was no way this doctor was going to be able to handle this kind of problem. So they had to take him down to Atlanta, and the doctor there just immediately removed that eye. He comes back home. He's missing it. He doesn't have an eye, and he's 11 years old.
Wow.
I think about this.
Yeah, that hurts my heart.
It hurts my heart.
Especially because the technology, it was so rudimentary back then, that was the way to fix it.
Yes.
It's just take it out. Oh, so sad.
Time passed, and I have a cousin who's an eye doctor, my cousin Bill, and he was saying what probably happened next was that the immune system was battling the infection in this eye, and once the eye was removed, it started battling the other eye. It started rejecting the other eye.
Oh, wow.
The immune system took over. So the other eye became problematic.
Wow, what a challenge for him.
What a challenge for this kid.
So, but to have your sight for the first 11 years of your life, and then oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
Amazing that
yeah.
And I keep thinking about his mother. She had just lost a child, she had just lost her husband, and here we are.
Right.
With this 11,
her nerves
12
were
years.
shot.
I would have been, I don't know what I would have been.
Myself.
Anyway, this is a frugal family. They don't have a lot of money. So they know they have to take him back down to Atlanta for this other eye. And so they wait, I don't know how much the wait was, but the 4th of July was the cheapest railroad tickets to get down to Atlanta. So his older brother, Whit, and my grandfather got in a wagon and rode to Murphy. They probably did a wagon because they could bring supplies back on the other end, would be my thinking. And they got on the train. But other people got on that train as well. There were these rowdy, drunk, gun-toting mountain men.
Oh my gosh.
On that train. It's the 4th of July. People are celebrating.
Oh my gosh.
So they were very rowdy. Granddad said later that it was quite entertaining to see all this going on. Well, they got into a fight, and one of the men killed another man. So now we're on the train. On the train.
Oh my gosh.
So now we're on the train, and you get to Blue Ridge, and there was this major holdup while the coroner had to come from Blue Ridge
Right.
and investigate what was going on and remove the body.
Mm.
So as they rode from Blue Ridge to Atlanta, these guys were still drunk and they were still rowdy.
Sure, right.
And it's still the 4th of July, so they're shooting out the windows and they're just having the grand old time.
Oh,
So my
God.
grandfather and his brother were really very happy when they got to Atlanta
I'll
and
bet.
got into the arms of their relatives that were down there.
So he was how old at that point? 11?
He was 12
12,
probably at
and
that
then
point.
he went on the train with who? His brother?
Mm-hmm.
And how old was the brother?
I would think
that
that
the
Whit
16,
was probably,
17?
he was the 18-year, I think he was probably 19
All right.
or so.
So he probably was very grateful that his brother was with him
Oh, yes.
on there. Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing for you to say because Granddad, they go back to Hayesville, and we're not quite sure how they found out about the state school for the, at the time, deaf and blind, but they did. It could probably be that the school had people in communities looking out for any kids that
Sure.
needed services.
Right.
They had a state representative who might have communicated with the state school for blind. However that happened, they found out about the state school for the deaf and the blind. And so when my grandfather was 13 years old, they took the wagon back over to Murphy, but no one went with him. So he's a blind 13-year-old kid. I think about this with my grandchildren now.
Right.
He's a blind 13-year-old boy. He's making this 350-mile trip to Raleigh.
Oh, wow.
He has to change trains in Asheville, Salisbury, and Greensboro. There were these stops that he had to navigate. So you have to think that there were just the workers of the train, people on the train, people just had to take care of him. And
Somebody had to have. I can't imagine even how do you navigate a train station without your sight, you know? And all the commotion and the people walking around and probably loudspeaker or people talking loudly, the next train coming, you know,
and he
how
was
scary.
he was a blind child who's not had any training
Right.
in how to navigate as a blind person. So that for me always brings me back to Margaret Jane, that she put her child on a train and sent him to Raleigh. I think that's
The
a very
strength
powerful.
and the fear, you know, but the strength to do it and the courage to do it anyway, and probably having to encourage him as well.
Oh my goodness, I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't know how that played out. Our family has lots of questions about that, but we
Right.
don't have any answers.
So how long did it take him to go from Murphy to Raleigh?
I have no idea.
We don't
I
know.
know it was 350. I don't think he stayed overnight anywhere. I have no idea.
Would they? I wonder would they would have just slept on the train while the train was
Probably.
going. You know, this is the next
Probably.
day. That's a long ways, even for a train. No idea how long that would take.
And I don't know how much the layovers were, or if he had to
Right.
change or anything. Anyway, now we get to Raleigh, and he's in school. And this is a classic, I'm sure, country come to town.
Oh, right.
You know?
Country mouse, city mouse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because there is a story that at some point he has a dorm room, and at some point he can't figure out where the heat is coming from in his dorm room. He keeps looking for a stove or a fireplace because he had no idea about central heating. He
No
didn't know
kidding.
anything about that.
Right.
So that was, I don't know when that happened or how that
Right.
happened.
I can imagine though, trying to figure out where the heat was coming from, and thinking you're going to bump into a hot stove. You know,
Because
so
you
very,
really
very
need to.
trepidatious around the room.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
he was just brave. I can't believe how. Just persevere, buddy. You know,
I
I want to
know,
like
keep on
pat him on the
going.
back or clap for him.
Well, the school in Hayesville, where he came from, was in Shooting Creek, and all his he had 12 brothers and one sister. Again, let's think about this mother.
Right. Bless her heart.
Bless her heart.
Oh my gosh.
The school in Hayesville was a one-room schoolhouse, and it was very adequate for what they needed as farmers. They learned reading and writing and arithmetic, so it was very typical of those days, I'm sure. But once he got to the State School for the Blind, it was a different curriculum.
Right.
It was a very classic. They learned more classical stuff as far as their curriculum, literature, poetry, math, reading, writing, all of that was much more advanced than what he was getting in Clay County. So
Right.
I'm not sure how that played out for him as well. I don't know.
No idea how he did with grades or whatever.
I think he did very well with grades.
Well, there you go.
I mean, from what I can tell,
Yeah.
let me tell you that they taught, they had the basic curriculum, but they also learned music, they learned piano, they learned musical notation, and then they also learned how to tune pianos, how to repair and tune organs.
Wow.
So they learned all that because that's the kind of job that they were anticipating
Him to
that-
have. I see.
for blind people to have.
I see.
Yes, and the girls who came to the school were taught they were taught the basic curriculum. They were also taught domestic skills like cooking, sewing, and crocheting was what they were taught. They were all also taught how to make mattresses and brooms and cane chairs because that was what blind people worked in different facilities, and that's what they did for a living at that time.
At that time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. One of the things that I found, and you and I'll look at this, they were taught Braille. And Braille, at that time, it was called nine-point, New York 9-point style. And I know nothing about that because later my grandparents learned how to do American Braille. It was not New York 9-point. It wasn't, and then later it was American Braille.
Okay.
And my grandparents eventually learned American Braille. I think it was much more common as they got older.
We will have Miss Terry do us an example of how to write in Braille here shortly, so stand by for that. All right, tell us what this is, Terry.
Well, this looks like something from my grandmother.
Okay.
I want to say because it looks like her handwriting. She did try to do some writing. But it is the American Braille system. And there were different levels. This is the basic level where each letter has a dot. Let me show you. Let me show you
Yes,
this
please.
first. This is a plate, and this is a stylus. And what they would do is put.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they could write. If you want to do an A, you would do it here. And a B would be here and here. And a C, so they would punch. They would punch in. And you'll notice, I don't know if you can capture this. I mean, you can feel it.
Yeah, I can see it.
You feel it?
So with the shadow, there we go. Now I can see it. Wow. All right. So each one of these holes
Well, you
are
can
the same. They're
you
all
can
the same.
see-
It just depends on where you punch to make
yes,
the letter.
you can see that each one of these this is called a cell. This part is a cell. And each cell has 6 holes that you can punch. And they were numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right? So when you're reading, now here's the tricky part. I want
Okay.
to show you about the reading. They read from left to right, and here's what my grandmother wrote. She's doing the Braille, and God so loved the world, and this is the Braille of that. So she would use her fingers, and she would be able to read that.
That's amazing. But when you're writing it, you said it had to go backwards, right?
Yes.
So, okay. So how do you know where to start? How many words are going to fit on the page?
You just like if you were writing, and then you would go just like you were writing, only they had to learn
How to go backwards?
how to write backwards from right to left, and the letters needed to be formed backwards.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Because it's the opposite side of the paper.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So they're pushing down. How confusing.
I can't believe that they had to learn this.
What talent.
So you push
So
down.
right now in this sentence, she's got God so loved the world. So she's got to start over here and put
everything backwards.
World, like.
No, she would start with God, but she would write God backwards. God, G-O-D, but the G would have to be written backwards.
Oh my
gosh.
gosh.
The O would have to be written backwards, and the D would have to be written backwards.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And then when you turn it over, then you could read it forward.
I see. Just amazing. Just the
so
talent.
I think about what that meant for them to have to not only learn to read Braille, and we all read right, left to right.
Yeah.
We all write left to right.
Yeah.
But they didn't. They had.
So the blind wasn't challenging enough. Let's do this letters backwards and then not just that the G-O-D goes, from right to left, but they actually had to flip it.
Yes, everything had to be flipped.
Let's just make it as challenging as we can for people.
And then they learned, interestingly, music notation.
Really?
And they learned music notation by using these cells, but they would have notations for the pitch would be at the top and the rhythm would be at the bottom.
You're kidding.
And so they would have to have some sort of signal that you were moving into music notation.
Okay.
There was also a signal if you were moving into numbers.
Okay.
So those were all things that they had to learn.
That's amazing.
And backwards.
Yeah, and backwards.
And backwards. Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Thank you so much for demonstrating that.
Welcome.
That's wonderful.
I grew up. My grandparents spent a lot of time trying to teach me how to do this.
Yeah.
I wasn't a very good student, I guess. But I loved watching them read. My grandmother's fingers were her index finger was pretty flat. I remember as a kid seeing it, and it was probably because
all the time of pushing down.
She was reading with her fingers.
Right.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
Great memories. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the Braille was something that they could learn to write and to read, but there was no system in place at that point to teach them arithmetic. They had to do everything in their heads.
Right.
They had to do all the math in their heads, which I think sounds very daunting.
Challenging,
to me.
yeah. And you can't even, not even like the little slide wooden beads on the rod to count, or can't use your fingers, or.
Well, you could probably, but they didn't. I mean, that's interesting, like an abacus.
Right.
Why didn't they use an abacus? I don't know. But from what I can tell, they didn't have any real system, so they did a lot of stuff.
Can you imagine?
My grandmother struggled with math, and I tell you what, I totally am with her on that. If I had to do everything in my head, I would be struggling as well.
Sure.
But my grandfather excelled in math. He could do, get this, he could do square roots and cube roots in his head. And I want to tell you that I couldn't do it if you gave me a calculator.
Right. I don't know if I would either. Yeah.
I don't know what I would
Not
do.
my strongest suit.
Well, my grandmother was also at the school, and she was coming from Madison County, and she had some vision, but she didn't have enough vision. She had some vision, but not enough to be in school there. She needed extra support. So she rode the train from Madison County to Raleigh. And at some point, as they were going back and forth, because my grandfather would go to school, and then during the summer, he would come home and work on the farm. And he would work with his brothers, and they would do all the chores, and he did them with them, except they wouldn't let him work in the barn with a pitchfork when they were nearby because they were afraid.
Afraid he's gonna cook them.
Yes,
Well.
that was their only line that they drew.
Right. No pitchforks for you, mister. So, did your grandmother travel back and forth over the summer too? So
Yes.
I didn't realize they stayed there for an entire season.
Yes, they were in
school year.
dorms. They were in dorms, and the boys and the girls lived very separate lives. They lived in separate dorms. They went to separate classes. I guess when they were making brooms and cane chairs. They interacted, but there was very
Or
little.
meals, maybe?
Maybe, but there was
Right.
very little interaction. So the story goes that my grandmother and grandfather ended up at the Greensboro station because she's going to Madison County, he's coming to Clay County.
Okay.
They end up at the Greensboro station together, and they must be coming from home going to school because she could see well enough to see this, what she thought was this poor blind kid sitting over there by himself, and she felt sorry for him. So she had just come from home, and they had apple orchards, and so she took an apple and gave it to him,
Aw,
and that's how they met.
that's amazing.
I know, it's very sweet.
And so then they got on this train and then rode together.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but they lived very separate lives at the school.
Sure.
So they figured out
I can-
how to communicate. They both had in common, but not at the same time, they had a Professor Royal. And Professor Royal apparently had these reference books in the back of his classroom. And so my grandparents would communicate with each other by leaving notes in the reference books.
Oh, you're kidding
so
me.
that they could.
That's amazing.
I know, it's very
I
sweet.
love it. Yes, it makes my heart fuzzy.
I know.
So without what's his professor?
Royal.
Royal. Without Professor Royal knowing, they've had to have written a braille letter and stuck it in the book behind him.
Yes.
And then when he wasn't looking, the other one had to get it out.
So here's what
That's
I think.
amazing to me.
Here's my question as a retired school teacher. How much did how much
How much did he actually know?
Yes. I mean,
Right.
how sneaky are they really if they can't see I mean,
Sure.
maybe.
He probably knew.
I don't know.
He probably knew.
I don't know, but I thought it was
Or maybe
very
even
sweet.
if they were close with him, he may have even, allowed it or encouraged it. Who's to say?
They sort of, flirted around, I'm sure, for several years.
And now how old are they at this time?
They're probably, I don't know how old they were when they connected in Greensboro.
Right.
I know that they both
Young
started
adults.
school. Yeah, they're probably 15, 16 years
Right.
old. And so when a year before Granddad graduated, and I would say he was around 19 at this point, she was a year older than him, they decided to become engaged. So they became engaged while they were at the school, but they waited an extra year for Granddaddy to graduate.
Oh, so the last year he was there, she was already home for a year.
Well, no.
She said, well,
No.
let me
I
tell you.
think she struggled a little more than he did in school.
Okay.
And I don't know when she started, so she
Right.
may have been a little behind.
Sure.
So he graduated in 1908, and she still had a year to go.
Okay.
But he talked her into, he's like, you're struggling in math. It would be much more fun if you just came with me and we got married and started our lives together. He talked her into it.
Really?
Yes. So
Okay.
in 1908, when he was, I guess, 20, she was 21, they got married at the Snow Hill Methodist Church. And they had a reception, the family had a reception for them in Shooting Creek. And one of the things I thought was interesting as I was reading about them is that Dr. Killian, who we have here,
Sure.
all of his office, and I found out recently he's Dan McGlamry's grandfather. That was
Right.
an interesting thing. Dr. Killian was at the reception, and
Amazing.
and eventually Dr. Killian would deliver all 7 of their children. So that was,
Oh, that's really
for
cool.
me, I thought that was.
Yeah.
Um,
Way to tie it all together.
Granddad had to figure out some way to make a living, and his older brother Whit owned a building over in the Elf community, and they had the post office in this building, and the woman that was running the post office retired. So Uncle Whit taught Granddad and Grandmother to come on over and run, and Granddad became the postmaster, and Grandmother ran a general store. And Granddad needed more challenges, so he and Whit dammed a creek, and they built a flour mill.
Oh my gosh.
So Granddad was
Amazing what he's done. In spite of,
oh my gosh, he ran the post office, and then one day a postal inspector came through and was just a little little horrified and concerned
Oh.
that there was a blind postmaster in charge. And my grandmother wasn't there at the time. So Granddad said to him, well, my wife can run the post office. And he said, that's great. That'd be much better. Not knowing that she was almost blind
Right.
as well. But anyway, they ran this post office and they ran the general store and the mill. I think was quite a life they had. And in
I
the
would say
meantime,
so.
in the meantime, they had my older Uncle Gene. They had him at that point. But three things happened to them. First of all, the flour mill burned down at one point.
Oh, no.
And so there was no insurance, and so there you
Of
go
course,
with that.
right.
And then grandmother gave birth to the second child, my Aunt Elvita. I was told by my cousin David that grandmother said that one of the reasons they were struggling with the store was that people would not pay their debts. They would come and get a line of credit, but they
Right.
weren't paying them off. So they were struggling financially with that.
Right.
And after the birth of her second child, my grandmother just became very ill. She just started being weaker and weaker and wasn't able to run the store anymore. So with them struggling financially because people didn't pay their bills. And, you know, this was hard times for everyone.
Sure,
I'm
yeah.
not saying that
You're talking about the early 1900s now?
It was a hard time for everyone. Everyone
Yes.
was struggling.
Yeah.
With those things happening and with grandmother's health deteriorating, the doctor told them that they needed to time out. They needed to take a time out. She needed help with the children. So they moved to Madison County where her family could take care of the two children.
Okay.
And my grandfather got a job with a company that went around in different counties going door to door selling books and magazines and supplies. And he got a job out there trying to find people to do those jobs. And so he was traveling by train, Buncombe County, Madison County, down in Marion and Old Fort. He had that area, that region, and grandmother went with him. And after they did that for probably several months, after they did that for a while, her health started improving and they were able to move back
That's amazing.
to.
So she just had to get away from the store and the flour mill and plus she had help from
Two
the family.
children. She had two children.
Didn't you say that she ended up having 7?
She ended up having 7, but not right now.
So, okay, she's only at 2.
She's at 2.
All right. So I'm thinking, how do you go for 5 more?
It's okay. I'm gonna
Okay,
try.
I know you're gonna get
I'm
there.
gonna move faster at this
No,
point,
that's
but
fine.
I love the story.
Yeah, it's
about-
great.
Well, they came back to Shooting Creek and they moved into a house that was originally his older sister lived in, and her husband, John Burge. They had both died of typhoid. And so my grandparents moved. There was a lot of people dying of
Wow.
typhoid during that era. They moved into that house. And there was a man named John Tiger, who was Rob Tiger's great uncle.
Oh my gosh.
Rob had a store out in Shooting Creek, and he and my grandfather got together, and there was a gentleman named Emerson Palmer who became my grandfather's driver, and they had a rolling store. And Granddad went all over the county selling staples, selling whatever.
A
bartering
rolling
with people.
store.
It's called a rolling
I
store.
love it.
I just learned that.
it. So it's basically a mobile, like they're 5 and dime on wheels.
Yes, so
Oh,
you
that's
would
fantastic.
get to these rural areas and sell staples like sewing notions and flour and
Right.
whatever, and they would barter and sell. And
That's awesome.
I think this was the moment with Granddad that people got to know him
Sure.
and got to respect him.
Right.
They knew he was a hard worker. And so at that point, they elected him to be the county treasurer. So he became the county treasurer.
Wow.
I know.
Amazing the things that he accomplished. I'm just amazed.
I know. Anyway, he moved his family into town. And if you think about where the library is and where the library parking lot is
Mhm.
across the street,
Yeah.
the house used to be there.
Okay.
And so they moved into that building.
Okay. Very neat.
You can tell I love my
Very neat.
grandfather's story.
Sure, how could you not?
I think it's pretty amazing.
Yes.
So he became county treasurer,
Right.
but he had been to town. He'd been to Raleigh, and he knew all about modern conveniences. And so this is one of the reasons that going to Raleigh paid off for him. He started talking to the movers and shakers in town and decided to start the phone company.
Okay.
We've gotten to the phone company.
Yay.
Yay. But I wanted to take a moment, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. I'm very interested.
One of the things that my family through the years has held in our hearts, has really treasured, was the fact that we're talking about a 28-year-old blind man who the town fathers here financially got on board with him, with the phone company, helped create the phone company, the franchise. They did all the financial investment. And so I have to read off their names because we've always,
Please do, yes.
we've always held them
Credit
in
where
our,
credit is due.
yes. So the bank president at the time was G.H. Hagler. And there were two lawyers, O.L. Anderson and J.B. Gray. And then there were the merchants. Bob Tiger, of course we have to have a Tiger in there. Ed Curtis, Fred Pass, Paul Scroggs, Weaver Anderson, and Early Anderson. And I'm missing Matheson. I know that Matheson was a name, so somehow I've missed
And
his
so
name.
when you say merchants, this was like the first stores that had phones in the town?
They didn't have phones yet.
Oh, okay.
These are just merchants.
These are the investors.
Yes, in the
Okay,
town.
I
These
see.
are the people that were, they were just town leaders.
Okay.
And so here comes this 28-year-old blind guy and saying, I want to start a phone company. And they're like, yeah, we're on board with that.
Now, what year is this?
It was around 1916.
Okay.
I know that he got the switchboard in 1917. So how this worked, and I'm learning this, I thought it was fascinating. If you're in a town and people are living in town, it's going to be cost effective to run lines to people's homes in town. I mean, how many poles do you need? How much wiring do you need?
Okay.
But Granddad and the other leaders in the town knew that to have a viable community, you needed to include all the people out in the rural areas.
Sure.
I mean, it would just be good for merchants to have access to the people out, doctors. I mean, just think about the communication would be much more beneficial for everyone if everyone were included.
If you could include them all, right.
But how are you going to talk about the cost of running lines from town to the far reaches of the county? And they came up with a solution that you didn't have to run a line to the far reaches. This person, this farmer over here in the very far, in the rural, very rural area, didn't have to pay for a line to come to him. He only had to think about the line between the next house and him.
So from the neighbor to him.
Yes.
I see.
And so that's that's how they formed.
That's smart.
In the rural areas, they formed 4 different companies.
Okay.
So you might have the Tusquity Company, phone company.
All right.
And there was one line. And those people on the Tusquity line would be responsible for paying and installing and maintaining, repairing those lines to those homes.
Okay.
And I think there was an East Side phone company. So there were phone companies. So this is how you end up with a party line.
Right? I
Right.
gotcha.
And if you look at the switchboard, can you do that? There are 4 party lines. So each one of these
Oh, I
represents.
see. Up here on the top?
Yeah,
1, 2,
each
3,
each
4
row,
plugs.
each one of these rows of bells
Oh,
represents
I see.
a separate party line.
Okay.
Okay. And I should mention that this is a Westinghouse 1800 switchboard, and it was made and it was distributed from Atlanta. It was brought up here from Atlanta, and it is made for people with, like my grandfather, who couldn't see the switchboard. He'd have to hear the different sounds.
Oh, so it had different tones, different bells.
I've heard several things about that.
Okay.
I've heard that his ears were so attuned that he could discern between each one of these bells over time. He could figure it out.
Wow.
But I've also heard that someone might have gone in and maybe filed a little bit on the inside to change it.
Right.
But I don't have any hard documentation on that.
Right.
So I have a question. So he's running the switchboard himself?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Well, here, and we're gonna include in this a video that my Uncle Buford and Aunt Elvita made in, we think it's in 1980s, somewhere in there. The story is that this switchboard arrived, and it was in the front room of the house across from the library. And Granddad stayed up all night. His brother Whit probably read the instructions to him. But my Uncle Gene, who was about 8 years old at this time, stayed up with him all night. He said he stayed up with him all night because he had to be the person that would find the bolts, the screws, that they dropped something.
Oh, right.
He had to stay with Granddaddy until Granddad put the switchboard, installed the switchboard. He did that by himself.
That's amazing.
My uncle was saying it. He can never remember being so sleepy in all his life.
Right.
He was up all night. He was 8 years old. He was doing
Right.
this.
He probably slept good the next morning, late into the day.
Right. Well, the first phone call was made to Willie Price's household because my grandfather knew that Willie got up early, and he decided to call him when they got going, and it went through, and the rest is history. Well, the rumor is that the women on the Tusquity line would have a certain time during the day, and they'd all get on, and then they were just chatting away, and because you live far away from one another,
Right,
and
you can't catch
on
up.
their things.
Right.
So I think it was really a party.
That's
on
fun.
this party line.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, by the time the phone, the different companies were responsible for installing the lines and stuff.
Okay.
However, Granddad had young men now. His children are growing up, and so the thinking is that the different companies would contract with Granddad, and then his boys would go out and put up the poles, climb the poles. They have those straps they would climb the poles and fix them. The poles were made out of chestnut trees, old chestnut trees, and the farmers would cut them down. They need to be about 30 feet long. We'd cut them down, bring them to the road, and they would get paid $1 for each tree.
$1? Oh my gosh. Okay.
Okay, so let me see. So those boys had stories. My uncles had stories about being linemen out here, and one of them was they were putting a pole in, and you dig a big, deep hole. You put the pole in, then you have to tap it around to make it stay in.
Okay.
And some of the boys left to go to lunch and left one of the others to do the tapping. Well, he got bored and left. And the next day, one of my other uncles came to climb up the pole, and it just started going like this with them.
Oh,
So
no.
they, my uncles would talk about this and just laugh because those were the days. I want to have a moment where I say, this is what my grandfather accomplished. Not only the phone company, he was county treasurer, but his time in Hayesville. Again, people were electing him. People were supporting him. It was a community. The community was just amazing and respectful of him.
Right.
So let me just say, when he was 26, he became the town treasurer, and then he started the phone company when he was 29. He went to the state. He was elected to the state legislature, where when he went to the state legislature, he helped pass a bill. He lobbied for it, of course. He passed a bill so that blind people throughout the state could go to college and get financial support to do so.
Oh, that's amazing.
Up until then, they couldn't go to college. And my dad knew this man in Asheville. I just know him as Judge Kathy. I think it's Sam Kathy. Kathy wanted to go to college, and he couldn't go. And so Granddad specifically got this legislation through so his friend could go to college. And he became a lawyer, he became a judge, and he was known in Asheville as Blind Judge Kathy.
That's amazing.
And I loved when I was reading Thomas Wolfe's Look Homeward Angel that there is in the beginning, there's sort of this little nod to the blind judge, and I knew exactly who that
they were
was.
talking about.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
that's cool.
They were good friends. My
Yeah.
Aunt Robin used to drive the two of them around town. They were very good friends, so there was that.
That's great.
He sold insurance during that time to earn a little extra money, and Dr. Carl Gillian, who was a professor over at, he was related to Dr. Gillian here, was a professor over at Western, and they used to hang out on Sunday afternoons and talk philosophy and poetry and those kinds of things. He organized, he started, organized, and chaired the first PTA in this area.
Really?
He was on the school board. He was elected to the school board. He ran during the Depression. He ran the Red Cross here. So his home was often filled with clothes and food that he would help distribute.
Right.
He was the county chair of the North Carolina League for Crippled Children. He worked for he was county board of public welfare. They elected him mayor. He was the county chair of the Better Housing Association. He was also an ordained Methodist preacher.
Unbelievable.
I know, it's crazy.
Wow.
And then he was also a local reporter for the Asheville Citizen paper.
I'm just saying, there's nothing he couldn't do.
That's crazy.
That's wonderful.
And then at the end of all this, he started the phone company in Robbinsville.
Okay.
So he did that as well. In 1938, he was approached by the North Carolina Commission for the Blind, which had just been formed a few years earlier. The Lions Club in this state just went out and lobbied and lobbied and lobbied to get this government agency created. So they needed people that could go out into the communities and help people who were blind, help them figure out what they needed, what kind of job they could do, how to train them, to place them on jobs. So he started out with that job. He had 7 counties that he was responsible for.
I'm just flabbergasted. I'm amazed. That's amazing.
I know.
What a guy.
What a man.
Right.
I love him.
Right.
And he, at some point, it just became too much to do from Hayesville. So he and his family moved to Asheville. And during that time, he started going to graduate school in Chapel Hill. So his older son, one of his older children, Buford, would take him down and read to him and help him take tests. And so he went to graduate school in social work, and then the commission hired him as a social worker, which meant he had a bigger region. He had 20 counties. And so he was then responsible for, there was a facility in Asheville that where blind people made mattresses and chairs and brooms. Remember, he learned how to do that when he was in college, so here he is. But those people would come, the people would come from all over the place.
And he was teaching them.
He was teaching them, and he was organizing who would teach them. He was more of an administrator, I think, at this point. He would organize, but he would also organize for the housing for them. I mean, there was a lot of detail that needed to be taken care of. In the meantime, he's also going around to people's homes that someone has just become blind. He would go and counsel them and try to help them and get them going and get them connected with different services.
What an amazing
so that was his job for a long time.
Imagine the lives he touched.
One of the things during World War II was that a lot of the factory workers were all fighting the war.
Oh, right.
And so the factories mostly up north were sort of stumbling a little bit during that time. And so Granddad, with other people from the Commission for the Blind, went up to DC. I'm reading about him being in Baltimore, in DC. There were some factories up in Pennsylvania. And he would go in with the team and they would talk to the factory workers and encourage them to understand that blind people could be trained to do these jobs.
Right.
And so he would go in and analyze these jobs and develop. He would develop programs to teach people how to train people on these jobs.
Okay.
So that was part of what he did with his job in the Commission for the Blind.
Just blown away. Wow, that's amazing.
And then the last thing I want to say is that also during that time, Western North Carolina was just rich with mica. And mica was important in the production of radios and radar and lots of technology. Grandfather heard that they
Mica. So I'm picturing
the sheets.
Is it like shale or what is that? Is it mica that's real super thin and layer?
Yeah, and as kids we used to peel them
Yes,
apart.
yes.
Yes.
In radar
Yeah,
and
yes.
radios?
Yes, I'm sure.
I'm amazed.
I mean, you'd have to have someone that knows more about that. than
Right,
I
I'm
do,
going to have to be
but
looking into that. That's very interesting.
He was listening, and people were saying that these production lines, what you needed was this mica, but the people on the line needed to get the mica to 1,000th of an inch, and so they were using these gauges. These sighted people were using these gauges. Well, having to use the gauge, whatever they were doing with the gauge to measure, Grandfather realized that perhaps blind people could do it better.
A little more sensitive to.
A little more sensitive to it.
Right.
And sure enough, they could.
Oh, that's
So
great.
they formed these pockets of people, blind people, that did this work. And my grandmother, who was all the way through, was by his side. She was doing it too, and she became so good at it that they put her in charge of training the people to do the
That's
mica
awesome.
work. So that's
And
her.
tell me again your grandmother's name?
Iola.
Iola. That's very unique. Pretty
It's a
name.
very, yes, her last name was Phillips before she was married.
Okay.
In 1960, my grandfather retired, and I think he retired before he wanted to because he kept extending his
Yeah.
retirement. They
Yeah.
kept granting him 1 more year, 2 more years. But in 1960, he retired. And I was 10 years old at the time, and I have to say, I wanted to talk a little bit about what I remember
Absolutely.
about
Please
my
do.
grandfather.
Please do.
The great story of that all of the cousins, when we talk about him, we think about this. The family went to West Asheville Baptist Church, and we would have we had a family pew that we all sat together on this pew. Well, my grandparents would walk down the aisle, and you could see my grandmother sort of tapping. She knew exactly which row she needed to turn in. So he would always let her go first, of course. And so they would sit there, and, grandkids were all squiggly. But the entertaining part for us was that we would watch Granddad, and I think I didn't mention that he has glass eyes. He probably had glass eyes when he was in school. They probably fitted
Right.
him for glass eyes.
Okay.
He had 2 sets of glass eyes, one brown and one blue.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
These are the things that children remember,
Sure, right.
He would sit in church, and grandmother's next to them, and they were pretty stately things. And grandfather would be looking right at the minister, and all of a sudden he would go, he'd be sound asleep, snoring in the middle of church with his eyes wide
Oh, that's
open.
funny.
And grandmother would be hitting him like this, and we would be over there being totally entertained by the whole
Right.
scene.
Snickering.
Yeah, snickering.
Oh, that's great.
That's the thing that I remember. The other thing that I remember, he would have us, I must have been 10, 11 years old when my grandfather, maybe even younger, my grandfather would say, Teresa, because that's what I went by at the time, Teresa, would you help me get up to the drugstore? And I'd say, sure. So he'd put his arm around me, and we'd go walking off. I thought I was so good at this. He would tell me, oh, you're really good at that. I thought I was the best
Right?
at guiding him along. It wasn't until I was like in my 60s but I was talking to someone about him, and they were saying, yeah, he was remarkable. He could walk all over the place by himself.
Oh no! But he let you think that he
Let me
needed you.
think that I was just
You
so
were perfect.
amazing at
That's
this
awesome.
job. He was a loving man. He was
Yeah.
a very cuddly man.
Yeah.
He would laugh at my silly little jokes. I mean, he would belly laugh back in his chair and just
Aw.
laugh when I would tell the dumbest jokes. When the cousins and I think about them, we think about their Bible that they had in their home.
Yeah.
And once I show you about the braille, you'll see
Okay.
the Bible was on a bookshelf that was probably about 4 feet wide and maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. And it filled up because there were so many volumes for just a Bible, but it had to be written in braille. So it took so much room
Right.
that we all grew up with this Bible that was in 3-inch bindings, and it was just one book after the other. It would fill up the whole thing.
Wow.
It's crazy, right?
So basically, each book in the Bible had its own.
Yes,
3-inch
yes,
volume.
Yes, yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
Who has that today?
We don't know. We were talking about that today.
If you
We
know
don't
where that
know.
Bible is,
Yes.
you let Terry know.
We're
Oh my
thinking
gosh,
they
that would've
probably donated it when they
Oh,
won. They probably
good
donated
point.
it to some group.
Right.
Would be my guess on that. As a child, I was just so amazed that he could go to the store. I guided him. So he'd go to the store because I'm all that.
Because I got it. I got you, Grandpa. Proud granddaughter. Absolutely.
He would go to the store and he could pay. And he knew one coin from another. And it was interesting because now, he taught me that if you have a nickel, it has a smooth edge, a quarter has a rough edge, a penny has a smooth edge, a dime has a rough edge.
Right.
So
Okay.
he could tell his coins that way. And
So
then,
the two rough would be quarter and dime, whichever
Yes.
one was big or little, and then the penny and the nickel
Are
size.
smooth.
Okay.
so you,
Well, that's great.
yeah.
Sure.
And he would have in his billfold, he would have separate compartments
For different
For
denominations.
different denominations.
Okay.
If someone gave him change, he would wait until he found someone, that he trusted, and they would sort it for him. So he was able to navigate that way.
That's awesome.
He never had a seeing eye dog because he didn't want to mess. He was very fastidious. I mean, everything had to be just very neat and tidy. He always wore a
No
suit.
dog hair on his clothes.
No,
Yeah.
he always wore a suit. He used canes to get around. The other thing I remember as a kid is going down into his basement. When he retired, he had a workshop. He made bookshelves down there because he had learned carpentry
Sure.
growing up at the homestead and also in
That's awesome.
school. We all have bookshelves in our homes that he made. But you could walk into this basement, and I tell you what, you couldn't see your hand. It would be so dark in there, and you could just hear him in there sawing and
Right.
hitting nails.
Oh my gosh, right. And you go down there and you can't see
I
what he's
can't
doing.
do anything.
Oh my
It was
gosh.
kind of eerie as a child.
Well, I never really think about it. Yeah, he didn't need any
He
light.
didn't need any light.
Wow.
And he had a technique for driving nails. So today, I still don't quite get it. But he would put a nail, he would put his thumb on top of it, he would reach back, and he would move his.
You're kidding.
So we're all thinking,
Ow.
ow.
Definitely hit the wrong nail sometimes. Oh.
And this family was very excited about, they got what they called talking books. And talking books were really books on record. But
Okay.
I remember how thrilled they were when the mail came and there were talking books, because they loved literature, they loved reading.
So they were on vinyl, on records.
Yes.
That's great.
So I think one of my loves of reading is, first of all, watching them read with braille. So
Yeah.
it's with their reading with their fingers, and also the joy of getting these books coming to their home.
Right.
Was
It was a big deal. It
It
was
was a
excitement.
big
It was like
deal.
Christmas, but not in December.
Yes, yes. And speaking of December, in 1965, he had a heart attack, but then he had a stroke, and
Mm.
so he died on December 17th, 1965. And
At how old?
77.
Wow.
he was pretty young for Penland, I tell you, because my father lived to be almost 98.
Wow.
So he was very young, and people were really, it was unexpected. But he has left such a legacy for us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And a lot of community love. You know, so many people really cared for him in the community. That's amazing. All the lives he touched, I can't imagine.
I can't imagine either.
You know.
And the respect he had from all walks of life. People just respected him and his courage and his determination.
Absolutely.
He taught his children, and he taught his grandchildren that when you move somewhere, you don't just become a resident of a community, you become a citizen of the community.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the many lessons that I've learned from him.
To be involved.
To be involved, to do what you can to make your
meet your neighbors.
your community a better place.
That's awesome.
Yes.
What a legacy.
I mean, like the work you're doing, you know.
I'm not from here, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to stay here.
Yes.
I really have fallen in love with the town and the area, and the people are amazing. I've been very welcomed.
Yes, and the service of interviewing people and getting it down on record.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for acknowledging that, because
Yes, of course.
sometimes I wonder if anybody's watching these things. Like, I know your family will, but, you know, people that are coming to visit this town or county or something, you know, always try to make sure that they know where we are so they can come in and check out the museum. But looking at the switchboard doesn't tell you the first thing, really, about your grandfather.
How did that ended up
Yeah,
being here?
how that, and you know, they have little information plaques around the different exhibits, but nothing as in-depth as what you've shared with us
And
today.
I'm sorry,
so.
I mean, I guess I got into the weeds a little more than
No,
I
I
wanted to.
love it, absolutely
But
love it. I don't
I
care
just-
if it's a 2-hour interview,
I'm
I
just-
just love the
Well,
information
you
on.
can cut it if you need to, but I do want to say that the woman who ran this switchboard at night, because you know you can't my grandfather
Right.
couldn't sit there night and day,
Right.
was a woman named Cora Hardin, and she lived just
Maybe that's who the story was about that I'm talking about, that Cora had to go home and open presents.
Oh, I'm
I'm
sure.
gonna
maybe.
find that.
Okay.
It's a Christmas Eve story.
Okay.
I'll find that.
Well, Cora had spent some time down in Texas working for a phone company on a switchboard. So when she came back up here, I think she's from here. When she came back up here, she was the perfect person
Right. She
to
already
run
knew.
the switchboard. Knew what she was doing, and so
Right.
she was perfect. And then high school students came and ran the switchboard. And the children, my grandparents' children, ran the switchboard and did the lines. So there was a lot of involvement here in this community.
And then back in those days, it was like KL529 was your phone number, right? Or it was a couple of letters and a few digits. Because I seem to remember something similar
is
to
that
that.
what it
From
has on there?
no, I'm just going from my own childhood
Oh,
memories,
okay.
and listening to my parents' stories about telephones, because it was the party line, and different household had a different ring. So one long ring is for
Yes.
you, and then two
Yes.
shorts and a long is you, or something to that
Yes,
effect,
if
right?
you watch the video of my Aunt
Okay,
Alvita
okay, yeah.
showing how to do that,
I'm definitely going to
she
attach that
talks,
in here. so
she
you can
talks
see it.
about that.
Not like they had a 10-digit phone number like we have now, a 3-digit
No.
area code and
No.
7 numbers. No, it was more like, I'm pretty sure, a couple of letters and a couple of numbers, you know, like JD55 or something, you know, it was very short. Because you
Yes.
think about, there wasn't
That many
that
lines.
many people, that many lines, or that many houses.
Yeah.
So, what an amazing
I
story.
know. One great little story is that my
Yes.
granddad decided that he would try to get over, he took his family, I'm sure, over to Madison County, north of Asheville, to hook up phones for them. That's where his wife is from.
Right.
That's where his in-laws were. So he hooked up, they got the poles in, they did the lines, and then he went back sometime later to check on them. And the local farmers had taken the lines down and used them to mend their fences with.
No, they didn't. Oh my gosh. Oh no. Wow. So he probably repaired it and put it back together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what he did.
But
It was just
way
a
to keep the
story.
wife happy so she can call her parents and her family,
I don't
right?
know how that worked long distance during that time.
Hmm.
I'm sure
It had to just been another section of wire
another
and another section of
evolution.
wire. Yeah.
Another evolution.
To be able to, so
Hey.
they started in small communities, and then eventually the communities would be connected where they could call different towns. I see. Okay.
Yes.
Well, we're guessing.
Yeah.
Right. We might have to do a little more research on this.
Yes. Thank you
Um,
so much.
Yes, thank you for
doing
sharing
this.
this.
I
We
appreciate
have,
it.
she has brought us a lot of photo memorabilia and back into the 1800s, I'm pretty sure. So I'm definitely sharing all those with you guys. Not to mention the interview. Now, who's your aunt and uncle that were in the interview?
It's Elvita Setzer,
Okay,
which she was the second oldest in the family,
okay,
and then Buford Penland, and he was the fourth oldest in the family.
all right. And I do want to mention that Dave was going to be here with us today. We had a scheduling conflict, but we're a little disappointed he couldn't come, but we're very grateful.
We've carried on.
Yes, we've made it through, but she's pretty much covered everything. I hope, David, that you wanted to talk about, and I thank you so much for sharing your family story. I don't think that enough people in today's age know this much detail about their family, and so I don't want to say grateful, but I'm so excited that your family has documented all of this.
Yes.
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 And I hope to be able to show my children and my grandchildren that kind of documentation from our family line, so I just think it's really important, that even if it's a story that you think might not be that important, to write it down, when you were 5 and something happened, or your grandfather or your grandmother taught you how to crochet or something, and to write that stuff down is so important to know where we came from, and you may not realize it. You got your humor from your great grandmother, that kind of thing. So it's really important to me, I think, to make sure you know your family's history. And this has just been an absolute joy, Terry.
Thank
and I'm
you.
very, very appreciative. Before I go, I just want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Let's Go to Jail with the Clay County Historical and Arts Council. I'll ask that you would please visit our website. That website address is clayhistoryartsnc.org. If you or anyone you know would like to be a part of our Let's Go to Jail series, anything about any of our exhibits here, or you came here as a child, or any little tidbit, please don't hesitate to email me, as I'd really love to hear about it. The email address for myself, Tess Thomas, is CCHAC@outlook.com. Please also, if you would, find us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, our YouTube channel, and we have an Instagram channel. Now, we may be expanding those platforms and adding a couple of more, but for now, that's where we are. So again, thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.